You're allowed to.
All right.
All right.
All right. So we think we're live. So just so you know, we normally have.
How about welcome to Behind Enemy Lines?
Yeah, with tech issues, but my son. So our normal guy Jason is he's in Canada. So my son picked us up in 15 minutes, and he's trying to help us here. So I hope.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we are. I'm watching on Rumble.
We're good. Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
Real professional.
Trying to help us here. Okay. So welcome to Behind Enemy Lines.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Oh, there we go.
How about you introduce the guest? There you go.
But, yeah, can you there's a way to control that camera unless you get the other one.
Yeah.
There's two cameras.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, that one's a better one.
Yeah.
If you could go to the other camera. Just so whoever's watching.
Yeah, I'll figure that out.
Oh, there we go. Wait. Oh, yeah, Paul, come this way.
All right. That's good.
All right, so
let's get the show on the road.
Yeah, so first of all, Paul and I should have known how to done this already, Russ. So it's our fault. Jason's out of town, and my son is being awesome to help us get this going. So anyway, we're gonna skip over all the little local stuff right now since we're so fortunate enough to have you on here.
Thanks for joining us.
So
you're welcome.
I'll do a brief intro.
Okay.
I have my partner Paul Drabick. He's a father. He's close to my house here. He's got children. We got involved fighting the pornography for our kids, right? And then we learned all this stuff is tied together, right?
Amazing.
The porn, the Venezuelans, and all the everything's tied together. So we know that. We became buddies, and then we started the show, right?
Terrific.
So, with that said, I met Russ about a week ago or so, and he was a federal agent back in. You could tell he's a mature man like me. I just kind of hide mine better, but he was a federal agent during the days when I was a bad boy, and I shared my whole story, well, as much as I could with him out of respect to what he's done and everything. And he wrote a book, Flight of the West Wind, which he's going to talk about some of the exciting things that he's done, and he risked his life for our country during the war on drugs, when it was the hot, well, I think it's crazier now, Russ. Honest to God. I mean, it was crazy then, but now it's
it was. It was.
I mean, so I'm not taking anything away from that, right? That was crazy, risking your life, everything. It's I think it's even more crazy now, isn't it?
Well, in the day, in the 80s, Miami was a war zone. A Time magazine headline came out with the cover of the Wild Wild West of Miami, and they were using Burger King freezers to store the corpses until they could do autopsy. They were so overflowed in the coroner's offices, they had to lease them out for Burger King. There were so many dead Cubans, Colombians, and other victims on the streets.
Yeah, and so when that started in the 80s, right? So first, it started the Cubans after the Mariel boat lift took over, right? The Cubans were controlling it, right? And then it kind of pivoted from the Cubans to the Colombians, and that's what you're going to talk a little bit about, right? And then now it pivoted to everything's got to go through the cartels, the Mexican cartels, right?
You're right.
And so,
can we back up a second? Russ you were a military veteran first, right?
No, I was not.
Okay,
that's the other guy. That's Tony Nargi. So I'm going to pass it off to you. I just want to set some context, and we were on different sides of the fence then, and so I could add context to some of the stuff you're talking from before I changed my life and all that stuff. So most of the guests know that. So why don't you introduce yourself? Talk about your book and talk about the things that you think are intriguing to our guests about some of the stuff you did on the war on drugs, which is the 80s and 90s at the height of the craziness that was ramping up in America to where it's at now. How's that?
Will do. Very good. My name's Rust Protentis. I wrote a book as a kind of a memoir, but also to document a case that I worked back in 1988. And my career started. I was a co-op student at Northeastern University in Boston. and I was supposed to get a job as a co-op student in the 5-year program, something to do with my field. But at that time, they were really getting into the beginning of diversity, and my co-op advisor said, "Hey, there's an interview set up for you with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms." I had never heard of them, and so I said, "Is it federal?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "I'll take it." He said, "Well, you could take it. That's the good news. The bad news is they want a woman. So just go for the interview experience, and there's going to be another 4 or 5 people going in for the interview along with you, and just do your best, and it'll be good experience, and we'll get you something where you're the priority candidate the next time." So I said, "That's fine." And he said, "The interview will be the following week, middle of the week." So I left his office. I got on the T, which is the metro system, the MBTA system in Boston. And I went downtown to the JFK building where all the federal agencies were located. And on the 17th floor was the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. So I went into the office and I asked the receptionist, "Can you please point me to information on your agency?" And she pointed across the desk into a little foyer area. She said, "There's pamphlets in there, and it will tell you everything you need to know about our agency." And I said, "Can you tell me a little bit about what you do?" She said, "Well, we enforce the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms laws, the federal laws. And we've been in existence since we were the alcohol tax unit prior or just after Prohibition." So I said, "Okay, well, my homework's ahead of me." I took about 10 pamphlets with me. And for the next week, I locked myself in a room and I read everything I could on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and found it quite interesting. They were the agency that went after Elliot Ness, and they were also involved in some other activities, including explosives investigations conducted by terrorist groups, the Weather Underground, the I think it was the Sam Jackson Melville group, the prison activist group that had blown up a couple of airplanes at Logan International Airport. They were protesting the U.S. government. The National Weather Underground, of course, wanted to overthrow the government. And so I read up on those cases. I read some of their more recent cases that got publicity nationally. And the following week, I prepared for my interview. And I rode the T in with my suit on, and knowing that I probably would not get the job, but I was going to do my best anyway. So I went into the office, and I was introduced to the agent in charge and the deputy agent in charge of the Boston office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. We sat in a big room, and I was at the far end of a conference table that seemed to me like it was 50 yards long, but it was probably only about 23 or 24 feet. And the agent in charge sat directly across from me. The deputy agent in charge sat midway in the table on the other side. So I was nervous beyond belief. I didn't know what was coming next. And I was just hoping he would ask me something about what I knew about the agency. So he opened up his dialogue and he said, "We've had several people come in here for interviews. You're the last one. None of them seem to know much about our agency. What do you know about the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms?" And it was like a message from God, like the 10 Commandments coming down from the mountain with Moses. I for the next 25 minutes, I gave him everything I knew about the establishment of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, what they did, the names of some of the defendants in their cases, the indictments that they had just levied against some of these terrorist bombers. And
sorry to interrupt you. So I guess you got hired, right?
So his line was, "Russell, we hire investigators on this job. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And apparently you're pretty good at it because you've done some investigation.
Yes.
So
I was going to say,
I got hired.
Yep.
I got hired. And then, they hired me for the co-op position. And then I had to wait till after I graduated to apply for a full-time agent position.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was a federal freeze on hiring. And
what year was that? What year?
It was 1976. 1976.
That's back when marijuana was big back then, before the coke.
Oh yeah, marijuana and coke was just starting to take hold.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really my field. I was alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and I was chasing down guys who were selling sawed-off shotguns and machine guns, and later on lighting fires when they took over jurisdiction over arson for profit.
But you guys collaborated extensively with the DEA at the time, right? So when
absolutely, absolutely.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. So anyway, there was a freeze on hiring, and the agent in charge would call me, and I had 90 days of eligibility to become an agent without being tested or going into the general pool. And it was like day 75, and my mother said, "They haven't hired you. Start writing letters." So I wrote letters to Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House, Ted Kennedy, who was a senator from Massachusetts, Ed Brooke, another senator. And I wrote one to the White House, the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, to President Carter, and said, I have a dream, and this is what I would like to do. Well, the only one who responded was the president's office, and they said, "We will accommodate your request." So, but I was approaching day 85, nothing. Day 89, I got a call from the agent in charge who had interviewed me previously and said, "You're hired. We've got a letter on our desk from the President of the United States, signed with authentic signature, and he's lifted the freeze on hiring for you and a couple of other agents. So you're going to be an agent, but no more writing letters." Mm-hmm. So I became an agent, and I made some significant cases with ATF, but I really got hold of what I was doing when I transferred over to U.S. Customs in 1982 and became involved in the war on drugs. And I immediately used my ability to develop resources by going to the Federal Parole and Probation Department and getting the list of any and all boat captains and airplane pilots who are currently on parole or probation. I went back to our office and I plugged their name into our computer system, and this would alert me to any border crossings, which would be a violation of the federal probation or parole. Mm-hmm. Within a week, I get an alert. But this is years down the road. This is like 4 or 5 years down the road. I got an alert, and 2 pilots were from my area, and they had flown from Santo Domingo into Puerto Rico. And they declared, when they arrived, casino money in the amount of $3 million.
Right.
They dragged a couple of duffel bags in through the customs inspector who was familiar with them and
Russ, sorry to interrupt you. So 2 things. One, you're not even supposed, when you're on federal parole, you're not even supposed to cross state lines, let alone international. Yeah. And then back then, when you'll know this, right? When you do anything cash related, it's got to be, if you want to stay under the radar, at $9,999, right?
You've got the law, right? Yep, you've got that under your belt. Yeah, and these 2 pilots were both convicted felons. They had both flown marijuana into the country. They were arrested, did federal time at Danbury, Connecticut, FCI Danbury, where Carlos Leda and George Jung, the pilot who they made the movie Cocaine about, had just finished their sentence.
Talking about. Yeah.
So these 2 industrious pilots took over their ground aviation class and started teaching the inmates how to fly. And of course, they didn't want to learn how to fly. They just wanted to learn how to make contact with a pilot who could fly for them. So once I found out they had crossed the country and they were 2 convicted felons together, that was 2 violations. And I found out from probation department and parole that they would have gone back for 6 years on a special parole. They would have gone back to prison. So I approached them both, and they both said they wanted to cooperate and they didn't want to go back to jail. One's name was Dennis Pekarsik. He was from Hyannis, Massachusetts, and he had been arrested for flying in about 1,200 pounds of marijuana into Brunswick, Georgia. The other fellow was a decorated Vietnam veteran. His name was Anthony Nargi, and he had flown 152 combat missions over North Vietnam and shot down one of the first Russian-made MiGs in a firefight, having launched up the carrier USS Intrepid, which is docked next to the Circle Line in New York. It's a museum. And lo and behold, his jet that he operated, the F-8 Phantom jet, is on the deck with his name inscribed under the canopy. So he was a talented pilot. And he felt terrible about being caught for flying marijuana into the United States from Jamaica, and he wanted to redeem his reputation. So I put them to work. And not to give away the whole book, but the case ended up making history. Both President Reagan and Vice President Bush talked about that case. They flew to Colombia. The Colombians had a Israeli manufactured jet. The designer was Westwind. And they flew the jet into Colombia. Colombians wanted to take over 1,000 kilos, but they would never have been able to take off if they did that. So they took 600, and they said they'd be back the next day for more.
What cartel was it? The Medellin or the Cali cartel then?
Medellin cartel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Pablo Escobar, right? For everybody.
Yeah.
This was for Pablo Escobar. He wanted to develop an air route between Medellin and New York, direct, nonstop, without having to refuel, because too many of the planes were crashing or being seized by customs or the Coast Guard in Florida. They wanted a plane to go direct from Medellin without having to refuel to New York, where their market was, a big part of their market. So these pilots did a great job. They flew down to Colombia. They loaded 600 kilos of coke into the aircraft, and the Colombians kept trying to stuff more in, and they pulled machine guns on them and said, "You got to take more." And they kept telling them, "We're going to crash." And so they finally acquiesced and they let them go. And they took off. They had some engine problems on the way back, and this was not an easy feat. I was now working for U.S. Customs, and they were so green to this. They had no idea you could send pilots to Colombia. They told me it was illegal. My own agency told me it was illegal, but I knew from working with guys at DEA that DEA pilots were flying in as well as informants.
Yeah.
So the agent in charge of customs said, well, you can't work that up here, but you can bring it to another office. So I called a friend of mine who worked in Long Island. He mentioned to his boss, and he said, we'll fly the guys down here the next day and we'll work the case. So it's the same agency, but the Boston office was afraid of problems, and New York, as usual, was very aggressive. So we worked the case out of New York, and the plane had a little engine problem and had to make an emergency landing in Miami, where the U.S. Customs inspectors, when searching the airplane once it arrived, found 2 kilos in Dennis Pekarsik, the pilot from Hyannis, in his flight bag. So they arrested him, and he later cooperated and gave me 2 much bigger cases. But the former military pilot, Tony, followed through. And the case culminated in one of the largest the largest cocaine seizure from an airplane in the United States at the time. And Rudy Giuliani's office, who was the U.S. attorney at the time, prosecuted the case in the Eastern District of New York. And so the book...
What year was that, Russ?
That was 1988.
Oh, wow. That was
so there's the book. So I got obviously, working for the federal government during the 80s, and in law enforcement, you had you were on the inside of the drug trade, which seemed to have blown up in the 80s. As you mentioned, coke didn't get too big until the 80s, and you started in 76. I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the journalist Gary Webb?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yes, of course.
So being a former federal agent, I would love to get your perspective on the what Gary Webb uncovered as the CIA's involvement in facilitating the drug trafficking, and of course that was tied to Iran-Contra, because what the accusation is right. The CIA was funding black ops to go after communist friendly governments all over the Latin American, South America countries. And I just was wondering what you think of that. There's a lot of evidence that points to the CIA being involved in the drug boom of the 80s. And since you're on the inside, I'm just wondering what you think of that.
I didn't hear much about that case, but I did watch that movie, Don't Shoot the Messenger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was quite a story, and very, I would say, from what I knew about not so much the East Coast traffic of cocaine, but opening up the West Coast for the Cali cartel. Mm-hmm. I would say that was a strong possibility that the Cali cartel was operating. They later took over New York. Medellin stayed in charge of Florida. Cali took over New York.
Cali took over Chicago too.
Oh, and Chicago. Yeah,
big time.
And then in Chicago, they began recruiting the Mexicans to do the distribution, as well as the Dominicans in New York and in Florida. And the fellow who hired me, Jimmy Carter, was responsible for something similar to what's going on our border now by welcoming terrorists and people from jail across our border with the Marielito boat lift.
And that was Cuba and Miami. Yep.
Yeah, the Cubans became the enforcer in Miami. And that's why, I worked down there for 3 months, and there was a shooting like every 3 or 4 hours. It wasn't every day. It was every 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes a guy would be smoking a cigarette, and a Cuban would come up to him and say he wanted a light. And if the guy said no, they'd kill him and take the cigarette.
Jeez.
Yeah, Russ, back then I used to go, so there's parts of Miami, they called it Little Havana. You probably knew that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was like, so people know I was scared to death, man. I would go, the Italian guy with some other Italians from Chicago, and they don't even, there was a bar called the Green Door or the Green something back then that we would go to.
Okay.
Oh, I got a little quiz for you. Do you know, like, what's wrapped in brown tape and it's got either a scorpion or a little bicycle logo on it?
Go ahead, tell me. Fill me in.
No, that was the Medellin cartel. They would stamp it.
Right.
Remember that? Remember they had the scorpion with the little tail? And then they had the old-fashioned bicycle with the big... Did you remember that or no? I mean, I seriously...
Yes, I do. Yeah. I do. And also, there'd be a name, too, like Gordo or El Rio or... all the kilos would have a stamp going to us, one individual person. I don't know what the bicycle and scorpion stood for at the time, but I'm sure it was going to a major player.
Yeah, and, you know what it was. So, and you could elaborate on this. So my understanding from back then, I was a young man. So when they would pay off people and stuff, right, in Colombia. And so, like, the corrupt government, the corrupt guards, the corrupt agents, if they see the scorpion or if they see the bike logo, they know it's coming from Paul Drabeck. No, I'm kidding. They know whose it is. And if it's not one of those stamps, they know it's not one of theirs. And then they would, confiscate it.
Oh, I thought that meant if the bicycle was going to Terry Newsom.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Blaming me? You're the one who got busted.
Yeah. So to get back to the Gary Webb, it's a possibility when you see that Reagan was up against a Congress that wouldn't approve the funding, and there was direct evidence that communism was spreading through South America. Mm-hmm. Of course, they went about it all wrong, arming the Army people with billions of dollars that didn't want to shoot or fight or anything, but
Yeah.
but it was
And then
kind
trying to hide it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, I actually met one of the fellas that was involved in that, Barry Seal.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah. He's the
that's
guy.
the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you met him?
Yeah, Barry Seal came up to New York to train Anthony Nargi, the military pilot, in how to fly the West Wing jet.
Wow.
And
Small
he
world.
spent a half a day. His mechanic, Jimmy Flack, I don't know if that was his real name or not, but
I doubt it.
one of our operations in Florida, Operation Skymaster in Alabama, they were an undercover operation that penetrated cocaine organizations or marijuana smuggling, provided transportation for the drugs to get here. It was Operation Skymaster, and the agent, since deceased, Jake Jacobson was his name. He recruited Barry Seal, and so I knew what kind of an agent he was, and we needed some help to train our pilots how to fly this airplane because we weren't going to pay for it. So I called up Jake Jacobson, and he, the following day, sent Jimmy Flack, the mechanic, up, and he sent Barry Seal. And Barry Seal could only stay for a few hours because he was flying another drug load in for the operation in Alabama. But Jimmy Flack stayed with us, and he installed a bladder tank. And Jimmy Flack was the one, if you ever watched the movie American Made,
Yeah.
he was the one who was on the plane filming Pablo Escobar and the government officials from Nicaragua loading the airplane.
Wow.
So he had quite a history, and
Small world.
And he felt terrible about Barry Seal and how that whole thing went. But
Barry wasn't Barry connected to the Mena, Arkansas route, right? When
absolutely.
Clinton was governor in Arkansas.
Yeah. Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
If you watch that movie, American Made, it's of course the media plays around with stuff like that, but
right.
Yeah.
it's quite an operation, bringing the soldiers up here to train them and send them back, and it was wild. But
the speculation is that Barry was a loose end, right? And so that's why he was eliminated.
Well, no, the reason he was eliminated, I mean, he supplied the direct evidence,
right,
of because Ollie North wanted to enhance Reagan's program to arm the rebels. They wanted to show the direct tie between communism and Central America, and Barry Seal's and Jimmy Flack's video sealed the deal, because there's Pablo Escobar and I believe Jorge Ochoa were loading the airplane in Nicaragua. So that was a direct tie between the cocaine cartel and the Sandinistas.
So sorry to interrupt. Were you involved with Nicaragua with Ortega?
No, I was not.
Noriega?
No.
Noriega. I'm sorry, Noriega.
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
Ortega
I was
makes
involved.
chips, nacho chips.
It's funny you mentioned that, though. If you watch, there's a special on Manuel Noriega, a documentary. I forget what channel it's on, but it's one of those history drug case traffic. They show one of my seizures in that documentary.
Awesome.
And I'll have to look that up and get that back to you. But I had another case later on in the 90s where I seized about 2.1 tons of cocaine off
Wow,
a
that's huge.
Holy crap.
off a Gulfstream jet. And the
Wow.
when we filmed
Man, I wish I knew you back then. I'm kidding.
I would have given you a discount.
I'm joking.
Yeah.
It's a joke. He's like,
Yeah.
Hey, the money that was promised these pilots was astronomical. 4,000 a kilo.
A lot of former military, right? That was a lot of former military pilots, I heard.
Yes, and because Tony was excellent, he flew that jet back on one engine into Miami.
Wow.
They, loaded with the cocaine, and no other pilot could have done that. And he had very little training. Barry Seal spent maybe 6 hours with him, and I didn't mention that in my book because it's kind of a sore spot with people about what happened to Barry and how they couldn't get the judge to release him without house arrest, and that's how he was assassinated.
Yeah.
Hey, Russ, when you were, because I mean the impression that I get, I mean, and that's kind of evidenced by the fact that that we now know that the government was indirectly funding some of these rebel groups to fight communism, and they had to do this by expanding the drug traffic trade into America. So I wanted to ask you, when you were an agent, I mean, that seemed like it was in early on and in the heart of your career. Do you remember any, seasoned agents ever making any comments or talking to you like, hey, this is kind of crazy, the amount of, activity that we're seeing. I never used to see this in the 70s or the 60s or anything like that? Because it sounds like, boom, 80s, it becomes unprecedented. And of course, there's the evidence, there as well.
The boat lift led to that in the 80s.
Yeah.
So did you ever hear any guys talk about like, this is something strange is going on here? This is more than we've ever seen or anything like that?
Yeah, the volume, as you said, was astronomical. And from being in that market, I mean, look at what happened to the price of a kilo. It was going for 50,000 a kilo.
Yeah, it was 60 when we first. So it was 60 in 1984 or 5, right? And then it dropped dramatically, and it so it was really expensive.
Into the 20s.
Yeah,
the low 20s a kilo. And
wow. And then
even up north, New York and Boston.
The Cali cartel at the end was like 16. The guy that was working the Fed, so my case, and I'm going to do a book. Hopefully you're going to help me introduce me to someone to do a book. My case included the DEA and ATF and the Cali cartel, and a guy that was working behind the back of the federal government, setting up the Cali cartel in Chicago, and was selling it for 16 or 17 in the 80s.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Late 80s, but
right. Yeah, so, and now I mean it's an afterthought. I mean, there's so much. It's so much.
Do you know what it is now? I mean, I it's been 30 years.
Well, the border's open. The border's wide open. That's one thing.
Aren't they doing more like fentanyl and all this stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, everything's laced.
Is
with
coke
fentanyl.
as big as it was before? Do you know?
No, it isn't. The meth is much more prevalent.
Wow. And that's worse than coke, right, Russ?
Say that again?
Is meth worse than coke? I mean, it's been 30 years for me. Like I told you.
What it does physically to a human being, I think is worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the addiction level. I mean, once you start, at least when you snorted coke, you could function. There were Wall Street brokers, bankers, politicians. You could function.
Oh, I could dance like John Travolta in South Miami.
Yeah. So you
keep the engine going, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And so I later, I finished that. Absolutely. Actually, I'll show you a photo I got in here. The pilot's boat. I don't know if you can see this. But the plane that's on the USS Intrepid with his name on it, Anthony Joseph Nargi.
Yeah.
It has a red star dated 1968, when he shot down the first Russian-made.
Wow, I can see that. That was the guy that you were part of your book.
So, from war hero to drug trafficker, huh?
Right, but then he redeemed himself. He became a hero.
Yeah.
This was a few of the headlines. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the New York headlines.
Is he still alive, Russell? Is Nardi still alive?
Yes, he is. He lives in Italy. He cooperated and he did the right thing, and so we paid him $50,000 for his services. Was that Hamptons, like the Hamptons, the wealthy Hamptons?
Yeah.
Yes,
oh wow. So tell me, that's where all the rich Democrats or whatever lived there. Tell us about.
Oh,
tell me
Obama's
about
lived
that.
there.
Like that was a while ago, I know. But tell us about that. The Hamptons bus. I didn't even know about that.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Hamptons. Well, that's the airport where U.S. Customs had a undercover fixed base operation, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a operation where you can lease or rent planes, and they rented office space, and they kept an undercover plane there. Not this one, but there was a fellow there, Haitian, who worked, oh no, Jamaican, who worked full time and leased out planes and started looking around for drug smugglers at the airport.
Was he eating cats?
No, just the geese. He was cutting the heads off the geese. Yeah. But anyway, So the case took place there because that's where the ultimate destination of the cocaine was. We transported it because the plane that the Colombians leased blew an engine, so we had to use a U.S. Customs plane to bring the coke up to Hampton Airport. So once we made the arrests, and it was kind of interesting. The arrests, I was an out-of-town agent, so all these guys were holed up in the Holiday Inn. It was room 112 in the Riverside Holiday Inn in the Hamptons, and I waited in the car while the New York agents went into the hotel room to get these guys. The signal was when there was a fellow that was one of the fellows who knew my first informant, the one who got arrested. His name was John Novak. Now, the thing that was amazing about this, which you probably saw, Terry, when you were in prison, every single person involved in this operation was an ex-con. The fellow who leased the airplane, made up the phony corporation, was a stockbroker. The truck drivers were both ex-cons who were indicted for transporting marijuana. The stockbroker was involved in a swindle, and he got federal time. Two Colombians, a fugitive by the name of John Novak, who actually was involved in helping to lease the plane that was utilized to kidnap Kiki Camarena.
Oh, that's the agent.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is, I was kind of loyal to my informants, so I wanted to protect them. So I knew if we got Novak, he was already looking at 20 some odd years in prison because he escaped from California. He was arrested in a continuing criminal conspiracy, and he was looking at 20 years out there in San Diego. So I knew if we got him, he'd be looking at another 20 years here. He'd roll over on everybody. And so when the agents from New York, the raid team, went into the hotel room to get the 7 or 8 guys that were in the room, they all ran out the back door. It was a sliding back door, and there was woods behind it. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was foggy. You couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. And all the guys in the room ran out the back sliding door into the woods. 7 of the 8 were captured. The only one that wasn't was John Novak. So I stayed back because he was the key to everything. And I said I was going to gather up equipment and everything. But I went out in the woods and I traced their steps. And I was by myself, and I had a radio with me. And I'm walking through the woods, and I felt like one of these guys, a deer hunter or something. I could only see, the fog was maybe 3 feet off the ground. So I could only see maybe 4 or 5 feet in front of me. And a deer came out of the woods and startled me. And I almost shot the deer. I had my gun out, I almost shot the thing. But it ended up running off in the woods. But as he ran off, I watched his white cottontail, and right below where he was, I noticed a red jacket wrapped around the bottom of a tree. And I looked for a second, and I see the red going in and out, and I know there's somebody breathing. So I pounced on the guy's neck, put the gun in his mouth, and said, "You move, and I'm going to blow your." I used a couple adjectives. I'm going to blow your freaking brains out.
You went hunting for fugitives, and you almost got a deer too, huh?
Yeah, that would have been a double whammy.
Yeah, right.
So, but anyways, so I cuffed him, brought him back, and but the guys were getting me on the radio saying, "Where are you? Where are you? What's going on? We're missing the fugitive. U.S. attorney's gonna bring us up on OPR charges, which means internal affairs charges." And so I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to continue to look." So I threw him in the trunk of the government car. I went to the Nassau County State Police headquarters where we were booking all these guys, and so the agent in charge and the case agent from New York came out and said, "We've got to find this guy. We're in trouble. We got to get the state police out." So I said, "Well, I brought back some equipment. Help me get it out of the trunk." And I popped the trunk open. There he is, handcuffed in the back like a stuffed pig. And they were thrilled. So that made the case, and he did exactly as I thought. He rolled over on everybody. So
that's funny.
Well, time in the trunk, and your case is made, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I should have gone back for the deer.
I hope you put that one in the handbook.
Yeah, I did. It's in the book. Yeah.
One thing I have friends that are ATF supervisors, and feel like, again, my stuff was 35 years ago, and then the special agents on my case, ATF and DA, I became friends with them before I knew who they were. We became friends. We'd go to dinner. I'd have them at my house. They did a really good job of tricking me.
Yeah.
And when I was told by the DA agent, he said, "This is the hardest case of my life because I really, really like you." It's like, oh my God.
I remember you telling me that, Terry.
Yeah. And there's a fine line between, I'm not proud. I say this over and over. I'm not proud of who I was, but like, there's a fine line between the police, the path I could have taken, but I didn't, and the path I ended up taking, and what it takes to be an agent like yourself, and then what it takes to be a bad guy, and it's awful and it's wrong. But there's some commonalities. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I'm not diminishing what you did as law enforcement. You know what I mean?
Of course not.
And it's kind of weird. I reflect back on it. It was like a movie. It's really weird. And
well, I give you the utmost credit because you're one of the few who turned things around. As I told you on that flight back, one pilot took 2 kilos out of the 600, put it in his flight bag. He went back to doing what he had been doing all his life. Mm-hmm. The other one completed the mission, later became a salesman for Raytheon Corporation.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish the story. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sold training aircraft, some of which went to Colombia for their drug program. And he became, he was very well off. He lives on the Swiss-Italian border, and he turned his whole life around. And actually, on the back of my book, it talks about one man's journey of redemption through another man's dedication to duty. Mm-hmm. So, if you read this book, you'll get, it's a quick read, and you'll get an inside look at it. And also, I'll show you one other photo. You might be interested in the case I was talking about. Here's the one. The seizure of 2.1 tons of cocaine.
Man, it's huge.
Yeah, and I'm in the middle in a red shirt, but I had a full head of hair and a black mustache then. But the drug wars took my hair away. So, but anyway, so I right now I dedicate myself really to. I started a seafood business, and we export from Pakistan and Indonesia to the U.S. And we suffered a bit under COVID. It shut us down because we were selling mostly to restaurant distributors. But we're trying to start it back up again. But I also, I work, and I'm proud to say it, for President Trump with the Mighty American Strike Force. And that's how I got connected with you guys. And I'll tell you about an incident. I ended up meeting Rudy Giuliani for the first time in 40 some odd years after that case, when I was at a Trump rally in New Hampshire in January. I had the book with me. I brought it over to his political advisor and attorney, Ted Goodman, and asked to have Rudy sign it. And he did. And then after the rally was over, I went to go pick up a friend of mine who had a bad leg. and you couldn't get near the arena because they were moving President Trump away from there, and the police were all dedicated to that. So I parked my car diagonally across the street from the Southern New Hampshire University Arena. And much to my surprise, out walks Rudy Giuliani and his political advisor, Ted Goodman, and his girlfriend. I forget her name.
Maria. His girlfriend's Maria.
Maria. Yeah. She had a beautiful red dress on, dressed very, very nice. And so I'm watching him walk across the street. Within seconds, people are trying to push him over. There's another group of guys pounding on his limousine, which is idling in front of my car across the street. And I'm looking around, there's no police. And of course, I think at the time he was short the money to pay his own private security. So, yeah, I because of all the lawsuits. So I intervened. I got in between him and some of the Moonbat liberals and got him over to the side of his limousine, to the passenger side. And he yelled out to me, he said, "Russ, you still have the book. Let's get a photo with it. I'll hold it in front of me." So I was just about to shoot the photo with my camera, and some asshole knocked it out of his hand. And so I said, "Don't worry about it, Mr. Mayor." And I just shut the door and I said, "Get yourself out of here." And then I looked, and they're bothering his girlfriend. They're pulling her hair. And so I get her into the passenger side back seat safely. And then I banged on the car and I said, "Just go." And at that time, somebody jumps out of nowhere on the hood of the car and starts pounding on the windshield. So finally, the local police respond, and I help them pull him off the hood. And Ted Goodman, who was the political advisor for Rudy Giuliani, rolled down the window and said, "Russ, we'll remember you." And so he handed me a card. But anyways, to make a long story short, the police ended up arresting the fellow, Richard something or other. I forget his last name. I've got the subpoena somewhere in my file. But I ended up giving a statement. And due to the fact that I was going to testify against him, he pled guilty. Richard Weber was his name. Richard Weber.
Good. So Johanna said you're connected with Rudy. You're going to get on his show, right?
So far, Ted Goodman hasn't done the right thing.
But isn't Johanna? Yeah. So
how quickly all this political polarization, how quickly people forget the hero that this man is, the key man to help take down the American mafia, and also the mayor that ushered New York City through 9/11. But all of that is forgotten because he's an ally of President Trump.
So I had dinner with him 2 weeks ago during the DNC, and I sat right next to Maria, and I like him more after spending time with him and talking to him than I did before.
Wow,
I really do. I like him more, and
that's great. Well, if you want to get me on this podcast, I'd be more than welcome to go over that whole.
I just got his contact information today, so I will strong arm him.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Not only that, when I was working down in New York on a Secret Service detail, every 4 years, like what happened in Butler and recently, when Secret Service is short, we go through a little 3-day training skit, and then we go out on assignment to supplement them because they can't cover all the candidates who have matching federal funds. Like this time, Nikki Haley had protection, had protection, RFK later got protection. But you've got a lot of people. You've got J.D. Vance and you've got Tim Walz. So they can't cover everybody. So anyway, I did several Secret Service details in New York during the mid-90s, 2000. We worked side by side with the NYPD. And matter of fact, Kelly was the chief of police, Ray Kelly. Yeah. And at that time, he was our commissioner. And so I've actually reached out to Greg Kelly myself to try and get in touch with him. But I know his father will get a kick out of this story because it happened during his regime as Commissioner of Customs. But to go back to the original story, the New York Police Department, to a man, raved about Rudy Giuliani, how he cut the murder rate in half. He kept them safer. There were less police fatalities. And the murder, not only did he do a great job later on during 9/11, but he made New York safe to walk on the street again by one-man beat patrol on foot, which was brilliant.
Yeah.
So I got one more. I got a question for you, and we're almost at the top of the hour. Do you remember, like, around 1990? So that was in the midst of what you were doing. When I was locked up in federal prison, and I'm like seeing they got these wires that were crossing out the yard, right? And I'm like, the hell, that's kind of weird. Why are they got these like wires like running across the yards and stuff? There was some Colombian cartel member, and I think it was in Florida, that they flew in with a helicopter to try to get him to escape. Do you remember that? Do you know who that was? So they started putting these wires across the yards so that if a helicopter would come in, it would get caught in the wires. And it was because of the Colombians.
I don't recall that. Wow, I'm not surprised. I mean, the money that, when you look at Pablo Escobar offered Guevara, the president, he offered him he said, you get rid of extradition, I pay off Colombia's national debt.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think that's some kind of money,
right?
I think that's why he got taken out. I was like, okay, this guy's getting a little too big for his britches.
Right. That was a big mistake. I think he'd still be around probably if he didn't
if he didn't get
And it takes a lot of credit for guys like you to do your job, risk your life, and not get paid off by the money. There's so much money involved in it.
Oh, I've seen in that case. I just showed you the pictures in the book. There's $2.1 million on the table. There's been times, I met Colombians undercover when we were arranging for the airplanes. See, they would lease the airplane for the most part from us. In this instant case, they didn't. They had their own plane. But in the future ones I did with Gulfstream jets, the Colombians would pay us $150,000 to $200,000 to lease a jet. We use their money to secure the jet. Well, I mean, I was with an informant in New York. We stayed at the Holiday Inn in Long Island, right near JFK. And a Colombian met us with a gym bag with $100,000 and just left it in between two payphones. And that was nothing. $100,000 was nothing. And I was with the informant. He left to go get a coffee, and I was there by myself when the guy brought I could have reached in there and grabbed two stacks, $10,000. Nobody would have known the difference. But I was committed to what I was doing, and I could have never lived with myself. I ended up having 5 beautiful children. And,
that's nice.
And I got 3 grandchildren. That's the top priority to me. And
back in 1984, something, we were like 22 years old. Me and the guys from Chicago were down in South Florida. We went to Denny's. We're hungover. We left a little bag in Denny's with like $88,000. And we got in the car. We were like, holy shit.
And they weren't even trying to bribe an agent.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we appreciate your service, Russ. Just one last question for me. I mean, obviously you're a Trump supporter and you're working with him. And, everybody knows that I think the biggest campaign promise and one of the main pillars of Trumpism is the, drain the swamp, the deep state. Yeah. So I would just ask you, given your history working for the federal government and what you've seen and now what you see that octopus has become, do you think that is the main priority? Do you think that the government has grown out of control? Do you think that it is now an existential threat to, a free citizenry?
It's the #1 hiring agency in the country. Look at these jobs reports that have been coming out. More than half the jobs created are government jobs.
Great point.
There's something wrong there, and I think this guy is. I think Donald Trump loves America and
He
loves
does.
the human beings, each and every citizen, more than anybody could imagine. They make him out to be Adolf Hitler, and he's got Jewish grandchildren. I mean, how anybody could believe some of the foolishness that they
Yeah.
put out there about the guy. I actually have put out feelers. There's several federal agents I'm very friendly with, retired guys.
Mm-hmm.
We will supplement Secret Service if they will allow us for free. We'll if they'll pay for our lodging, we'll go to all his rallies. We'll secure outside the fence so there's nobody sticking a rifle through it.
Mm-hmm.
I would do that for free for the next 2 months or whatever. And I love this country, and we know he loves the country, and that's what you see in him every time he's out there. He loves the country and the people. He's not in it for the power. He doesn't need it. He's worth multi-billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This guy's he's been shot at. And like I saw a headline the other day, Kamala Harris dodges questions, Trump dodges bullets.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. I used to say before he got shot, he was like a war hero. Like, I didn't go to war. Paul was in Iraq during the war. And Trump was like a war hero before he got shot and wounded, right? I mean, he sacrificed so much for us, unlike these other scumbags. He sacrificed his business, his family, his health, his safety, his security at such an age of which he shouldn't be doing that.
He's taking on the most powerful entity that has ever existed in the history of civilization, the United States government.
Yeah.
I mean, that right there, like, how do you, my big thing about all the criticism is like, yeah, but I won't even argue with it. Yeah, but the balls on a guy to take on the most powerful, but also the most corrupt establishment in the history of civilization. Like, yeah, I mean, how do you argue with, how do you not have respect for that?
Especially when he knows that every rally he goes to could be his last.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what greatest? There's a verse in the book of Matthew. I'm a born again Christian, and there's a verse in the book of Matthew. There is no greater sacrifice than to lay your life down for another, and he's willing to lay his life down for us. I mean, that's a blessing.
Yep.
Fight, right?
Yep.
Right, Russ?
Well,
yeah,
I got that T-shirt. The next day I ordered. The next day after he shot at Butler, I got that T-shirt and the other one that says, "If you're going to take a shot at the king, you better not miss." And I wear them religiously.
They're starting to know that's true.
You made me. I got my coffee mug here. I got to show you guys here. It's so it's Kamala Harris. I did that. Remember with Biden. So I got another one with the Venezuelan, but it says crime, rape, fentanyl, murder, sex trafficking, and Trendle And so, and I got a T-shirt. I got another T. So if you go fightingbehindenemylines.com, you get a T-shirt with her pointing at a Trendle gang member. And we got to make sure that she gets credit for what she's done.
Yeah, no kidding.
Absolutely. She deserves all the credit in the world.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
so it was an honor to have you on the show.
Oh man, really great
conversation. There's way
so
more
much.
we could have covered.
Yeah,
And I want to thank my daughter. My daughter took over for her brother, monitoring the technology here since Jason's up in Canada. So I want to thank my kids as well.
Wonderful. Well, if you'd like, you'll have to when we go offline, get me your address and I'll send them a copy of my book with my signature in. How's that?
Thank you.
Great talking to you, Russ. Thanks for
Awesome.
jumping on.
Thank
Great
you.
talking to you guys as well.
Enjoy
Hey, keep fighting for America, you guys.
You
Thank
too.
for
You too. Thank you.